A couple interesting facts just to throw out. First of all, this was a time when actors weren't allowed to be buried in consecrated ground. So that's how highly the profession was seen. The theaters were on the wrong side of the river. They were in the really bad part of town. So these are where the taverns were, and the audience would come in, and you just have to imagine the 17th century, and the smell from bodies packed in a tight place. So you had the groundlings, which were the people that paid like a penny or a small token to get in. But there were people there that were plying their wares, selling things. The prostitutes would work the crowd. The upper crust would sit sometimes up in the tiers, but it was a very sort of taboo thing to do, to go over to that side of town and watch the theater. But they were raucous. They would respond. They would answer back. They would hiss. They would throw things. This was really a very active sort of entertainment during Shakespeare's day. And so if they didn't like something, or if they found something really funny, they would respond in kind. Shakespeare is filled with double entendres and all sorts of references to sex and other things that are sort of naughty, and the Elizabethans got all of that, and so they really responded to that. I mean, Shakespeare had a dirty mind in some regards. So.
The theater has been a lifeblood of education, entertainment, and communication for hundreds of years. The prolific playwright William Shakespeare put it best when he wrote, quote, "All the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances. And one man in his time plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages." Unquote. No place better illustrates Shakespeare's observations than Youngstown, Ohio in the 1920s. In its heyday, it was a mecca for immigrants from all over the world. It was a railroad hub for the rest of the country, and jobs in the steel industry were plentiful. And to top it off, it was listed as one of the 50th largest cities in the United States. Youngstown was one of the places to be if you were looking for work and financial stability. But the populace wanted more diversion from their mundane day-to-day work schedule. The vaudeville and touring shows, which visited this up-and-coming metropolis, were not enough. The many parts they wanted to play were not being satisfied by merely being an audience member. The audience members wanted their own stage, even with national luminaries such as George M. Cohan, who was part owner of the Park Theater on Youngstown's Champion Street, where Al Jolson put shows together before taking them to Broadway. Youngstown locals wanted a theater in which they could participate.
The Strollers Dramatic Club was firmly entrenched in Youngstown in the early 1920s. The problem with them was they were a membership organization. You had to be a member or you couldn't do a show there. And with community leaders interested in the betterment of the community and wanting a rich cultural base, William L. Rook, the theater editor of the Vindicator at the time, published an article about these small little theater clubs that were popping up all over Youngstown at that time. And many of them were overtaking the more established Strollers Dramatic Club. From the success of that article and the reception of that article, fellow Vindicator employee Ella Kerber-Resch, now this is not Ella Gerber. Ella Gerber came along much later. This is Ella Kerber-Resch, started up the Youngstown Little Theater in 1924. Now their first production was The Butler, and they did that as a benefit for the nurses at City Hospital. Now you have to remember, these little theater clubs existed for fun. They weren't interested in quality. They didn't really care whether their shows were any good. It's just to have fun. But local actor Harold Igo, he felt the theater was more important than that, and he wanted a theater that concentrated on quality of performance and product. So to that end, he started the Herrick Players in 1926. with like-minded members of the Youngstown Little Theater. Now, their first production was an original show called The Unknown Soldier, which was written by Igo and fellow thespian Sophie Ozersky, and they did that show at the Park Theater downtown. Now, from the success of that show, the Herrick Players in January of 1927 would merge with the Youngstown Dramatic Society, and then merge again later that same year with the Community Drama Club. And the result of those two mergers would be the birth of the Youngstown Players. So Igo was able to get like-minded people as himself together from not only the local little theater clubs, but also the Youngstown Little Theater. So the Youngstown Players then traced the essence of their beginning back to 1924, when the Youngstown Little Theater was founded. But they were different from all these other little theater clubs. They wanted their own place. They wanted a single spot where they could do all of their shows.
Without wasting any time, they turned to two Youngstown gentlemen, Doctors J.A. Sherbondi and A.E. Brandt, and asked them to ostensibly give the Players the horse barn they owned at 138 Lincoln Avenue. Built in 1880, the barn had once been owned by George Todd, Ohio Governor David Todd's son, to house his racehorses. With little fanfare, the doctors acquiesced, with the old barn becoming the new Youngstown Playhouse in 1927. Since the building sat directly between Lincoln Avenue on the south end and Arlington Street on the north end, the actual location has been referred to being on either Lincoln or Arlington.
With their new home being ready, the Youngstown Players staged their first full production on the stage of South High School on May 2nd, 1927. It was an original show by Harold Igo titled Devil's Acre. It was based on the book of Revelations, chapter 9, verses 1 through 12, and dealt with Youngstown's industrial life and its association with the social life in the steel mills. Well, the success of the show was so huge that it garnered no less than 100 charter members for the Players right away. And the show's director, Ritter Levinson, was appointed the first president of the Youngstown Players.
With Playhouse volunteers completing the needed renovations, the Youngstown Playhouse on Arlington Street opened on January 23rd in 1928 with 3 one-act plays: The Eligible Mr. Bangs, A House of Cards, and The Mirror and the Manicure. The 3 one-acts were not the high point of the evening, however. The landmark event was that the Youngstown Players were the only theater in town to have their own home base. Advertising was pretty much free for the Playhouse, with numerous newspaper articles heralding any number of upcoming Playhouse shows and activities. Even Town Talk, a very popular monthly magazine in this city, consistently ran articles favoring the Youngstown Players. Theater critic Lawrence Manning Lawler proclaimed his love affair with the Playhouse in one edition.
Our bow to the Playhouse, then, is made with a high degree of respect. It has placed within our easy grasp a source of entertainment revered by all and desecrated by none, the legitimate stage.
Things weren't totally rosy, though, for the theater for a while. They had a fire at the barn in April of 1928, which caused considerable damage to the tune of $5,000. But the Players weren't deterred. They banded together, they made the necessary repairs so that they could go back and continue to do shows at the old barn. And when they returned, they got massive participation from actors, local actors, technicians, and others who wanted to be a part of this theater. They were very proud of their huge membership base, and they boasted some of the most wealthy and most influential members of the community as board members. But what they didn't have was a leader. They didn't have anybody to steer what was becoming this ever-growing ship that they had. So to that end, New York director and actor Werner L. Haldane was hired as the Players' first professional director. Now when he came in, it ushered in a whole new era for the Players. He was a person that reportedly despised pretense. He cared nothing about the opinions of others, but he did know theater. And he did shows that were well known at the time. He did shows that had recent Broadway runs. But he also realized what sold tickets, and that was a familiar face. So he initialized the activity of bringing in known Broadway actors to play leads in Playhouse productions. And his first was Jackson Thorne, who was very well known at the time, to do the lead in On Approval.
But Thorne was not the only celebrity on board at the Playhouse. Prior to Haldane's entrance came a woman named Helen Moyer, a New York actress who played Broadway, understudying the renowned Miriam Hopkins in Thou Desperate Pilot. It was Moyer's opinion that the Playhouse should break out of the little theater mold and into the expanse of a community theater. It would be her influence that would get Werner Haldane hired. But being from the South, she also had considerable social skills and thus ushered in the concept of the opening night reception. Youngstown was already a society town, so this fit in perfectly with local residents. Anyone who was anyone now wanted to be seen at the Youngstown Playhouse and the opening night reception that followed. The combination of Haldane and Helen Moyer brought participation at the Youngstown Playhouse to an all-time high. Haldane's trademark was booking recently closed Broadway shows for production at the Playhouse before they were released to any other theater in the country. Audiences responded in such abundance to this practice that the print media began following trends that the Playhouse seemed to be setting.
Haldane's know-how brought two recently closed shows to the Playhouse stage, Loose Ankles and Sour Grapes. Both shows were accompanied by their respective playwrights for opening night. He knew how to get these people in. And now the word was starting to spread all over the country about this little community theater in Ohio that was doing such outstanding work. And running schedules, though, in those days were surprisingly short. They usually opened on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or a Thursday evening, and only ran for 2 or 3 performances, and almost never on a weekend, because weekends at that time were not deemed as prime draw times for the Youngstown community.
On more than one occasion, the Playhouse would venture away from their beloved theater and stage a play at another Youngstown location. One of their favorite spots was Idora Park on the south side of Youngstown, a favorite amusement park with local Youngstowners. Their audiences followed right along with them. By 1931-32, Werner Haldane would leave the Playhouse to take a job at a theater in Birmingham, Alabama. Little, if any, media coverage marked his departure. Even less media coverage welcomed in his replacement, Ben Ford. And although the board stated that they were very happy to have acquired his services only lasted 2 months before he would also take his leave. But with the Playhouse growing in popularity around the country, it would not be long before professional director Reed Hamilton would pick up the Playhouse reins from his predecessors. One of his first early successes would be Oscar Wilde's Lady Windermere's Fan. A staunchly Victorian play, it would prove to be the most successful show ever staged by the Youngstown Playhouse since 1924. It sported the largest cast ever on a Playhouse stage, 16, and the show opened to rave reviews. Demand for tickets were far beyond expectations, with many people being turned away from sold-out performances. It would necessitate holding the show over for additional performances. But the sky was the limit at that time with a March 1933 production of the popular comedy Dulcie by George Kaufman and Mark Conley. This show would surpass everything previously produced by the Youngstown Players. Numerous reviews lauded the quality of production and cast, prompting Esther Hamilton of the Youngstown Vindicator in her Around the Town column to state that it was the best thing the Players have ever done. And Hamilton carried considerable weight in the community when it came to reporting. The Youngstown Players were soaring high, but with great success comes great change as Reed Hamilton disappears from the Playhouse and the board hires Dr. John Timon for the top job in September of 1933. Timon, from Odessa, Russia, was known for a very firm and opinionated style. Upon his introduction to the Youngstown community, he stated quite clearly,
"Art for art's sake and all that sort of thing is pretty much the bunk. Acting is work, and only those who work the hardest ever get anywhere."
He departed from the practice of public auditions to having all auditions being done privately in his office. Timon's wife, who also had a strong theatrical background, would assist him in his Playhouse duties, Timon's introduction at the Playhouse was attended by 200 people and consisted of Timon and his wife reading all 3 acts of Candida. Timon was introducing change for the Youngstown Players.